Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. The question I would like to ask you all tonight, and I'll say a little bit before the discussion, is about the intersection of your spiritual practice and current events. We can talk about what's happening in our country and by default to the rest of the world in political and cultural terms. However, what's happening is so profound and so destabilizing in lots of different ways, and also engaging and perhaps distracting, that it really has direct relationship with our spiritual practice. How, or if we are not, bringing the view and what our practice and the fruits of our practice to bear in our way of relating to this. And how are we doing that or not doing it? How are we succeeding at doing that, or how are we not succeeding at doing that? There's a great degree of groundlessness right now. How are we relating to that groundlessness? There's a lot of turmoil. How are we relating to that? There's a lot of outrage. How are we relating to that? There's shock and grief and excitement and all kinds of things happening that could deepen our practice if we relate to it using our practice, or it actually could pull us away from our practice if we somehow internally decided that certain aspects of this were too important to bring our practice to them and try to work with them with our practice. When I say too important, I mean when people have crises, sometimes they say, oh, I was having a crisis, so I didn't do meditation because I was too swept up in my crises. Or I was so upset and, I didn't do my practice because, what I was upset about was so important that I had to abandon my practice for a while. You know what I mean, right? So maybe some of us are doing that too. I don't know. But anyway, it's a question. So I was saying before we started talking tonight that as a child of the 60s, and I mean a child, not a love child, I was a child for most of the 60s. I grew up in the Vietnam War era and the anti-war movement, and my parents were mostly armchair liberals, but sometimes they got up out of their armchair and did something. And one of the things that they did was take me to anti-war demonstrations when I was a little kid. And they were big, right? But it was a big part of my childhood, this whole scene. And even when I was younger, my mother used to work at a summer camp teaching art, and it was a Marxist summer camp. She wasn't a Marxist. I don't know how she got together with the Marxist summer camp. I'm not really sure why that happened. But in any case, I got free tuition. We didn't have much money, but because she was teaching there, I got to go. And I remember Pete Seeger would come and sing at the camp, right? And we would sing Woody Guthrie songs. And, they still are very, very much a part of my landscape. That kind of feeling of everyone should just get together and we should make a good world together. That's kind of what I got out of that. Anyway, so I was saying before we started tonight that in my view, what's happening now is bigger than that, bigger than the Vietnam War, anti-war movement. It has a completely different character. It's involving many more people. And it's really exactly parallel to the Mahabharata, which we were reading together on Wednesday nights. In that we have some few generations of people, including old fogies like me who just happen to grow up singing Pete Seeger songs. But we have several new generations of people who really represent a change of heart, a change of values, and who are wanting things that previous generations haven't wanted. And I think, I'm talking about the millennial generations and again, including some of us oldsters, people who represent a greater degree of wisdom when it comes to taking care of each other and taking care of the world and loving each other. So obviously that's not every single person, but I think that there's, from my view, this has happened. I don't know why it's happened. I think part of it, and there could never be a complete explanation, but I definitely think that part of it is social media, that we just get to see and relate to many more people in many, many more different circumstances, and we become familiar with them, and we empathize with them, and on a daily basis. And this is not the experience of previous generations. Right? So there's that. There's also the collective understanding that our way of life is under threat from planetary destruction, environmental destruction. And I think that many, many people have that understanding, and that draws people together when we have that common understanding. There's also, again, I think because of social media, more of a sense of doing things collectively, that you can take swift collective action and join together with people in different kinds of ways that we didn't have before this. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be some sort of cultural pundit and come up with some explanation of why all this is happening. But the parallel with the Mahabharata is that there are these two related families, and they're at what is described in the Mahabharata as a crack in time. In other words, a shift that's between one way of being and another way of being. And particularly in the Mahabharata, between a more ignorant, self-centered, aggressive, warlike way of being, a more greedy, warlike, power-mongering way of being, represented by the Kshatriyas, and another way of being, which is more about reverence and devotion and communal living and wisdom. And I think that the people that are participating in the Mahabharata on Wednesday nights understand that through that reading, we're being given a container through which to experience what's happening now. And understanding that there is destruction that has to happen before something new comes in. So the thing about the Mahabharata is that these two families are related. They're not separate. They're not opposites. One is not purely evil and one is not purely good. Everybody in there has karmas that they're working on. The message is one of how can we maintain an open heart toward everyone while we're going through this. If we polarize, then we're missing the message of the Mahabharata. We're missing the point. If we polarize with hate or even with outrage, we have to take strong action as Krishna advises in the Mahabharata. We must act, we have to act decisively. And that's going to look at it in lots of different ways. We have to have tenacity. We have to have perseverance. We have to not give up. We have to cultivate wisdom and open-heartedness. So we have to take strong action, but we can't polarize. We have to recognize that we're related to everything that's happening here, that we have participated in many, many different ways. We have participated in the situation that we have right now. We've participated through our lethargy, right? Our complacency. We've participated through our dogmatic outrage, our dogmatic positions about things, which led some people not to vote at all, right? We have participated by just letting things slide because they're inconvenient, especially around the environment. Every single day we participate in destroying the environment simply because it's too inconvenient to stop doing it. And when things have gotten really tough, a lot of us have dug our heads into the sand because it feels too overwhelming. Participating in politics in this country, and I guess in other countries too, feels very overwhelming because you don't know how to speak to power. When there's overweening power, it's hard to know how to speak to it. So now it seems that we've gotten into a situation where we're finding some voice, right? People, and I mean the heart is finding some voice. That's what is so moving about this. This isn't like it was during the anti-war movement, where there was a lot of emotion, but it was not about bringing this heart-based approach to everything. It wasn't about that. It was about stopping the war. And so it had a very different kind of discourse than we're hearing now, where people are just getting up and saying we have to love each other and we have to take care of the planet. And many, many, many people are saying that. And we can't allow this tyranny, and we will not go back to we will not go back to this. But the thing is that in order to not go back, first we have to see what it is. And I think what's happening now is we're seeing what it is. We're seeing it much more clearly than we ever have. And we can't mistake seeing clearly for polarization. We have to recognize, as I said in a satsang some months ago, we have to recognize that we also made Donald Trump happen. We are also responsible for that. It's not just somebody else who did it to us. Right? We have to recognize our commonality with everyone in this situation. We're all human beings on this planet, first of all. Right? And we all have to survive here. And how are we going to do that? Hanging out in outrage is an old way of being, right? That's like old style politics, hanging out in outrage, being the outraged opposition. We have to be the open-hearted, unstoppable opposition. If we want something new, if we want a new age, not just, I don't mean new aginess, but I mean if we want that crack in time to come to fruition, it has to be based in something other than polarization and outrage. I come from that. I understand the politics of polarization and outrage. That's what I was trained in growing up and as a young adult. It didn't change the system. So I'm really excited about how reading the Mahabharata through this time, which seems almost like phenomenally uncanny timing. I'm really excited personally, and just for our community and anybody who might listen on the podcast, really excited about how that provides us with a guide for moving through this and presents us with all kinds of questions we can ask to explore our relationship to this. So getting back to what I started with, I was saying before Satsang started that this is bigger and different than the Vietnam anti-war movement. And I suspect that in terms of political upheaval, the internal political upheaval, that there hasn't been anything this big since the Civil War. I suspect I can't think of anything else this big with this much potential to change the terms on which we live together here. And I think that the people who are saying we won't go back are absolutely right. The younger few generations that we have right now are operating, by and large, on quite different terms than generations before them. They're not going to suddenly change and start operating on 1950s assumptions. So if nothing else, we have time on our side. Because you all have a lot more years to live than the people in power. And I think that whatever the younger generations represent, and maybe I'm being a little pie in the sky, but I'm usually quite cynical about this, about generational change meaning anything at all worth paying attention to. Because I've lived through many generations and nothing much changed. And now here we are, right? So this optimism about these new generations is really a new thing for me. You will prevail. No doubt about it. I don't know what it will look like, but you will prevail. And I also don't know what we're going to have to go through to get there. It might be quite horrible, but we have to keep insisting on what our hearts are telling us is the right thing. We have to keep insisting. And we are not good in this country, by and large, at persisting. We give up way too easily. And I know that from teaching you all. You know, you come to some little bump in your practice and you're like freaking out and crying and being angry. I don't even know why anybody bothers telling the story of Milarepa anymore. It's like so... I mean, it's so divorced from how most people approach their practice these days. We have to have stories like, yeah, man, he went through 2 weeks of nothing's... 2 weeks he sat on that cushion and nothing much was happening, man. I can't believe he kept going. And, you know, his teacher said, you have to clean my bathroom every day. Wow.